Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We're here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host. For this episode, I have the pleasure of having Nick Turner from Mainstream Green. And first of all, Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. I already know quite a lot about your work, but for many that are listening that perhaps don't know you and what you do, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Nicola Turner, or Nick, and I have a social enterprise called Mainstream Green. And Mainstream Green really started, the context starts with my career history. So I spent about 15 years of my career working in the fast-moving consumer goods industry, or the FMCG industry. And in that role, my job became all about understanding shopper behaviour, how we behave as shoppers in the supermarket, and then using that insight to orchestrate things to get us to buy more. So, look, I really loved my job. I got to work with really cool, really smart people. I was constantly learning. I was working in overseas markets. It was great. But then about 10 years ago, my husband and I started on a personal journey towards living more sustainably, a journey that kind of came from an aspect of well-being. My husband started getting mild dermatitis on his hands, and that kind of kicked us into a journey of understanding our toxic load, what we were using on our skin. That then evolved into a journey of trying to reduce our waste, which evolved into a journey of questioning our relationship with stuff and looking at minimalism. And it just kind of really spiraled from there, I guess. And I got to the point where my personal career and my career and my personal values were getting just a little bit too divergent. In my day job, I was understanding shopper behavior to get people to buy more. And in my personal life, I was on a journey to consume less. So those two things got a bit far apart. So I started Mainstream Green as a way of kind of bringing those two things together. So Mainstream Green is a social enterprise, which is all about understanding human behavior to get us to consume less. And I see consumption as what and how we consume is everything when it comes to our impact. So if we can really become more mindful of our consumption and make simple changes around our consumption, it can really impact the effect that we're having on the world around us. But it's also really great for our own personal well-being, and that was what I found on our journey, was changing our consumption, lightening our impact on the planet, simplifying our relationship with stuff was really great for our own personal well-being as well. It helped us connect to the things that are really important in life. It helped us save a lot of time and a lot of money, and there were just so many wins out of it that's really why I do what I do, to show that there's a way that you can lighten your impact on the planet that's also great for your own well-being and has all of those benefits. So yeah, so Mainstream Green is my social enterprise. I operate out of Cambridge in the Waikato in New Zealand, and I live here with my husband, and I have 2 school-aged children as well.
Beautiful. It's so interesting, and there's so many topics inside of what you shared that I want to get into. But I'm really interested in the fact that there is this idea, I believe, that is that when we are in this modern society, that there's a lot about having stuff and consumerism. Mm-hmm. How is that related to our own well-being, and how actually having less, what you were saying, being able to get into a more simple living actually ends up being better. And for a lot of us, it's actually, and this is the way that I live quite simply in a sense. Mm-hmm. I actually feel more fulfilled by not having so much stuff. And I think that it's a case of this idea that the more that we have, the happier we'll be.
Mm.
And I wonder if you can share, you shared a little bit, but for you, how were you starting to notice that? Was it something that it took a while to realize, or that you actually noticed from the beginning, like, oh, actually, this is nicer?
Yeah, and it's I think, you know, consumption, as you've alluded to, consumption's just become the way of the world, right? And I found that in my job. Like, I never thought to question my job and my corporate career. It was just kind of, consumption's the way of the world, and I never thought much of it. But the interesting thing is, it's kind of marketed to us in this way that it's all about buying the latest thing or having the latest thing is going to make our lives easier and better, and that's what's marketed to us, right? And there's also that, you know, that rush we get when we buy something, you know, that instant gratification. We buy something and it feels really good, you know, it's all the neuro reactions to that. It feels good, so it's really easy to kind of focus on that. Well, the marketing industry is telling me it's going to make me feel better, I'm going to make my life better, and then it does feel good when I buy it. But then the interesting kind of contradiction of that is we've got people like Marie Kondo, you know, who has become such a worldwide phenomenon because we feel completely overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that we have. You know, it's a real pain point for people that we buy all the stuff and we fill our homes and our lives with all this stuff, but then with it comes this whole sense of complete overwhelm, and also this, it's really time consuming, and it's the more stuff we own, the more responsibility we have, right? Because it's just more stuff to look after and tidy up and get frustrated at our families for not putting away and moving and maintaining. And so there's this real contradiction that we're surrounded by this narrative of consumption and how it's going to make our life better, but the reality is it's actually making our lives more complicated. But then also we're just spending, you know, we're working harder and longer and going into more personal debt than ever before to buy all of this stuff, you know. And then there's this whole constant keeping up with the Joneses phenomena, right? That it's this pressure to, well, okay, I've got this house and I need to upgrade to the next house and the bigger house and the newer car and the, you know, flasher sneakers or whatever that might be. And with that comes a whole lot of, whether we're conscious of it or not, comes a whole lot of pressure. So I don't think there was a lightning rod moment for me where I kind of connected those two things. It was just over time we were like, actually, man, if we reduce the amount of stuff we have, it just makes life easier. You know, if we're more conscious and of what we're buying less, man, we're saving money. You know, if we are actually intentionally breaking up with that concept of more and going, you know what, we're very content in our 110 square meter modest home, then that's actually really liberating as well, because it's given us more freedom of choice. You know, my husband's very good at articulating it in terms of, you know, wealth and success to us is all about freedom of choice. It's not having more money and better things. It's actually just making a conscious decision to go, actually, this is, you know, where we're at, what we're happy with, and then that gives us freedom of choice instead of having that constant kind of quest for needing more and needing bigger.
Yes, and I think that's such an important topic, because there is the narrative, as you say, of having more and to be able to fill our lives with all of these things. And I actually know from my own experience, I am able to work way less than the majority of people.
Yeah.
Just because I'm spending way less than the majority of people. And this is something that it's really interesting in the way that we've been educated, and most people have been educated. It's like work more, work more, work more. And I see this with so many people that because they're working so much more, that means that then they need to get into purchasing all of the more convenient things, which are more expensive. Yeah. which now they can afford to have that. And I'm like, wait, if you don't buy that takeaway lunch and make your own from food that you either grown in your back garden if you have, or that you went to a farmer's market. Now all of that money that you save, now you're able to actually like use that time and be with yourself. And it's such an interesting balance of that, to be able to get people to understand it, because it's not easy. Most people are in this race going nowhere really, but they are just in it, and it's hard to break away from that. And as you mentioned before, I remember I did, now it's been 12 years ago, or almost 13 years, that I did my postgrad in neuroscience. And I know, and I've shared this on the podcast a couple of times, how we were learning what you were saying, like what our minds are doing, and how we can understand to get people to buy more and to consume. And it's amazing for me to see how people like you are able to actually use that knowledge to get everyone to see things differently, and to be able to bring to the mainstream how to live a little bit more in harmony, which is for me one of the biggest things. And understanding that what is, in a sense, what you said, like what is success for you, that feeling of choice, like how many people actually would value that more than the money that they are actually chasing.
Yeah, and it's again so much in that, and so many awesome things you said in there, and but it's really hard. Like I even still find it hard sometimes, because you do feel like you're swimming against the tide a little bit. You know, there is a multi-trillion-dollar industry convincing us to consume more, and I know, like I was a big part of it. I totally get it, and they're really good at it. You know, and I'm not here to bag that industry at all. That's not my interest. I think it's just making sure we understand and are conscious of it so we can navigate it. But it's a really strong narrative, and it's a really, even now sometimes, you know, I have to really consciously check myself to really back myself in my decisions, because when you're surrounded, you know, it's really normalized, this whole, it's normal to be super busy, and it's normal to be on that ladder, and it's normal to be juggling, you know, work and family and all of those things. So you can sometimes feel like you're swimming against the tide. But I guess for me, it's as soon as you really lean into it and start seeing and feeling the impacts of it, you're like, oh my gosh, like it's really liberating. That's a big word, but it is. It's because sometimes you sort of doubt yourself, because it is just such a strong narrative. But then every time we reflect on the choices we're making, we're like, actually, no, these are right for me and my family, and that's, you know, that creates that kind of self-fulfilling motivation to go on and do more of it. Yeah. And also so many conversations you have with other people who are kind of like, oh yeah, like I wish we could do more of that, or you're really lucky, and I think, which is another point that you kind of alluded to, is I think that one of the hardest things is feeling like you don't have a choice. You know, to me, it's the same thing. It's like, whatever your lifestyle is, whatever you do, no judgment, like, you know, it's very personal, but as long as you feel like you're making a conscious choice to be where you are and doing what you're doing, to me, that's the most important thing. Clearly, you know, with the wording of, you know, conscious action as well, I think it's, you know, we're probably singing from the same song sheet, but I think the most important thing is that you're conscious of how and what you're doing. And I don't want to undermine people who maybe don't have a choice at all, but you know, if you're in the position to have, you know, just consciously ask yourself if what you're doing is a choice, and if it's the right choice for you.
Yes, definitely. And I do recognize, and I share this a lot, is that I am privileged, and we are privileged to be able to even think about this, not only to be able to do it, because the doing, as well as we mentioned before, actually it can be cheaper to live a little bit more on this side of the minimalist and more conscious consuming. But the education and the openness of mind to be able to do it, actually it's a privilege. And I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned before, just to see because of course everyone is starting at a different place, and how one goes about it is different. How was it for you and your family when you started to make the changes? What were the first places that you started to look into to see, okay, how can we live more consciously and with more sustainable our footprint in mind?
Yeah, so for us it started because our kind of entry point, and I do find that it's the same with diet and nutrition, right? Often somebody will have something happen in their life that triggers them to kind of start on the journey. So for us, that trigger was my husband getting dermatitis on yeah, he had it on one finger, the ring finger of his left hand, and it was quite mild. It wasn't a big, I've really tried to come up with a better story of what started our journey, but that's reality. It wasn't a big deal. It was just this really small thing. And he was getting really frustrated by it, went to the doctor, got steroid cream went on, it cleared up like that. But then he'd stop using it, it would keep coming back. So that was our entry point. And it was kind of, as he was going through this, it was like, well, clearly we're treating the symptoms and not the cause. What could be causing it? Something I've kind of read or heard was that on average, we're putting hundreds of different synthetic chemicals on our skin every day. So it's like, well, maybe there's something in that. So that was our entry point. So we came at it very much from a personal well-being, reducing our toxic load perspective. And then that journey kind of became questioning everything we were using on ourselves and in our home every day from an ingredients point of view. That kind of then spiraled to, well, what about the food we're eating? And then that led to, well, we're simplifying the products we're using, we're eating more real food, we're reducing our waste. That feels good. What else can we do to reduce our waste? Cool, we did lots around that, and then that was all the kind of the day-to-day stuff. What about our bigger relationship with stuff and the other waste that we create through the other things that we have? So and when I talk to people, it's kind of like everybody's got their different motivations and their different starting points, and it really doesn't matter where you start, because ultimately when you flick a switch, you find that everything's connected, right? So generally, if you're doing things that are better for your own personal well-being, you'll often find they're better for the planet as well. Often you'll find that like right at the heart of sustainability is valuing the things that we have, and that lends itself to frugality is a strong word, but valuing the things that we have will often mean that we're not spending the way that we maybe were before. So very, really, really interconnected. But for us, it started from a personal well-being point of view, and that was our motivation and that was our why. And then that kind of just led on to be, oh, okay, cool, this is actually having a really, it's lightening our load on the planet. So how do we do more of that? And I think that taking, and again, probably, echoing what you guys are all about as well, is it's taking action feels good, and doing the right thing either for your own well-being or the well-being of the planet feels good. So it kind of fuels that journey into spiral off in different directions.
Yes, definitely. And I do know that I value so much the fact that everyone is different and everyone has a different entry point and a different journey. But for me, this is why I love having conversations with people like you, because we are able to inspire people and we are able to show all of the different ways that someone can start, because a lot of people are they think that sometimes that, oh no, I've been doing this way, it's too late. And it's the same for personal well-being with a lot of my clients that I teach on how to find balance. And so that's more from a well-being, personal well-being standpoint. A lot of people think, like it's too late. I'm like, until you're dead, it's never too late. Yeah, but it's making that change, which is the challenge. And I think that for a lot of people, there is this fact that sometimes these things are hard, and of course changes are hard. So I would love to hear for you what were the biggest challenges that you found throughout your journey so far.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge has been, I'm a type A personality. I like everything to happen, I like to be in control of everything, and I like everything to happen now. And so when I started on this journey, it was like, okay, cool, got to go hard, we've got to go fast, and we've got to do all of these things. And that just doesn't work. That in itself is not sustainable, right? Because I found if I tried to make too many changes too quickly, then they either weren't sustainable in terms of I'd get frustrated or bored or freak out my husband or my kids or something, because there's just too much change too quickly. So I think that was my biggest challenge, was trying to do too much too fast. And so and a lot of what I speak about is how do you really focus on one change at a time? Because what I've found is that, whenever I talk to people, it's like, just choose one thing and choose the easiest thing you can, because then it feels a lot easier, it feels a lot more accessible, and it also becomes a gateway to more change, right? Because you get hooked on that, I did that and it feels really good, and I've kind of embedded that into my day-to-day, and it feels good, and I feel compelled to go on and make another change. Like I often tell the story of, I started this journey by changing my hand soap. We switched our hand soap out to one with better ingredients. Now this is what I do for a living, it's been, but it was that one small change, just that series of one small change, and allowing that to happen. I think also it's really important to really embrace the why of why you're wanting to change. It's the same with everything in life, right? If you're really connected with your why, that keeps you going, even when it gets a little bit tricky. So, and everybody's why is different. It's what we were just talking about before, right? So for me, our why to begin with was our personal well-being, and it still continues to be. So for me, it's like, okay, any choices I make need to be focused on the well-being of my family. But I also now know that they have to take the same amount of time and money or less, otherwise they're not going to stick. So I'll give you an example. When I first started on this journey, I was on maternity leave, and so I had a bit more time that I would normally have, more time at home. And I started reading about sustainability, and it's like, you have to make everything. So I'm like, okay, I'll start making my hand soap and my dishwashing liquid and my laundry liquid. And I started making everything. And from a sustainability point of view, gold standard, right? I knew all of the ingredients that were going into it. I was buying everything pretty much without packaging, really simple ingredients. I was saving money, but it was taking me a lot of time. And I didn't really enjoy that. I'm not inherently somebody who enjoys, the making process. I'm more about, how can I do something in the most time efficient way possible? So I found that I was just really not enjoying that process. And every time we were going to run out of something, I'd find myself getting really frustrated that I was going to have to make it. And I really didn't look forward to the process. And so I wonder if there's a better way that works for where I'm at. So we now buy brands that we know and trust. I take my own containers in, get them refilled. I'll buy enough to last me 12 months at a time. So I'm only having to shop for those products once a year. It's saving me time, it's saving me money, it's better ingredients, and we've significantly reduced our packaging waste. So for me, it's always going, well, what's important to you? What's your why? Why are you doing it? What are your kind of basic measures or drivers? And then you can make sure you're finding solutions that fit with those, because I'm like, and my husband's the same, his motivation is very much time. If we can find changes that are going to save us time or not take us any more time, then there's no, why would you go back if you're saving time and making a better choice?
Yes, and that's such a great point, because I also think that there are so many people that are either people or businesses that are actually doing amazing things.
Yeah.
And we can also support them.
Absolutely.
by noticing like, those ingredients actually are the ones that I want. I can buy in bulk and without packaging. Actually, like, that makes more sense. I have in a similar sense with a lot of the products that I use. I never really got into the making of them, because that's also not something that I enjoy. Like, I prefer to go and say, I'm going to go to buy my shampoo and conditioner bars from Etik, and I'm going to go to the refillery to buy this, and it's just like, I can stay with my own values and my why by supporting someone that is actually doing that as well. And that's so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. There's so many awesome people out there and awesome businesses doing cool things that it's a great way to support them as well.
Yeah. I'm curious, Nick, if you can share, what are some of the biggest things that you have seen that have been the easiest way to get people hooked and interested in actually taking these steps for themselves and for their businesses as well?
Yeah, I think it's really easy. A couple of things. I could say a number of things, but I think it's the way I kind of pitch. So I work with councils in terms of I consult with them. I work with businesses and do a lot of kind of speaking in businesses to get them excited and engaged and being more sustainable. And then I do public facing stuff in terms of, speaking events and campaigns and things. So in all of those, it's all about making. It's so easy to feel like sustainability is this really big deal, this big other thing that we, if we're a business, we have to have the right strategy and we have to have the right resource and we have to have, all of those things. And for individuals, it's like, I have to have the right container or the right, coffee cup, or I have to have all of these things. And so for me, the messaging is all about, it's not this big other thing. It's just really simple switches, or it's just a different mindset or different lens that we need to throw over the things that we do, be it as a business or in our everyday life. So that's very much my aim is just to shift people's mindsets just a little bit, where they go, actually, I can do this and it's accessible for me. One, because it's really not that hard, and two, actually what I do will make a difference. So that's very much the way that I talk about things and the way that I kind of approach it with people. And then I also, the space that I work in is behavior change, because we all inherently know that the way we're consuming, the way we're living, it's not conducive, right? In terms of we're consuming too much, So I think we're at a really good place now in terms of awareness and visibility, right? I think most people inherently want to do the right thing and are connected to that. But the space that I work in is, it's all good to know something, but how do we actually take action, and how do we move from knowing to doing? And behavior changes, that big bit in the middle, which is that big gray area of being human, right? Just because we know we want to change doesn't mean we do it. Diet and exercise, sleep being good examples, right? We all pretty much know what we should do, but that doesn't mean that we do it. So that, I talk a lot about that and kind of give people basic tools, I guess, to help navigate that. And the first thing is, there's a really nice framework that I use, which is the EAST framework, and that talks about things like things have to be easy. Change has to be easy, So it's, which is what I was talking about before. Like for me, it's that time thing, right? Things have got to save me time, otherwise I'm not going to do it. If it's too hard or too time consuming, I'm not going to do it. Or it could be something as simple as going, I have lots of people who are kind of like, I really want my family to compost, and I have a compost bin in the kitchen, but everybody just puts things in the rubbish bin. And I'm like, well, what if you moved your rubbish bin outside the back door? Or what if you put your compost bin right there on the bench? If it's the easiest bin to get to, then people are way more likely to use it, right? So how do you make things easy? How do you reverse engineer things and understand what's getting in the way of people changing their behavior and make that easier? And then there's other bits to that in terms of being social. So, how do we create new social norms? How do we make things more timely and relevant? It's just a really nice framework, but that's kind of what I do as well, is because I think it's really easy to get frustrated that everybody wants to do the right thing, but then they're like, it's too hard, or I don't know where to start. So I think actually giving people permission to acknowledge the fact that they're human and to find ways to navigate that to create change is a really powerful part of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting that for me it's the same. It's being able to get people to understand what's the next step, what's the next action that I can take to make it easier. Because of that, I do know A lot of times with a lot of people that come to the events, or with people that I talk to, and they see so many different aspects of this living consciously, and then they're like, oh my god, I cannot do it. I'm like, well, like as you were saying, like what's the next thing that you can do? And one of the biggest things, and you just mentioned something that I also think that it's very challenging for a lot of people, is when they are the only ones either at their house or in their environment that are starting to make changes. How do you work with that in terms of when you work with someone that wants to make change, but at home perhaps like the rest don't want to do it? You mentioned, like, for example, like making it more accessible, putting the compost bin there, but in general, how do you work with that?
Yeah, so I think absolutely that's a really big barrier. I think the two big barriers I get are time, which we can talk about if you want to go down that aspect. And the second one being, how do I bring other people with me? Because nobody operates in isolation, right? Be it in your workplace or in your home or in your social settings, you're never isolated. So how do you kind of bring other people with you on the journey? So yeah, I talk a lot about connecting with the why. So it's really important to know your why, but it's also really important to know other people's why that you're trying to bring on that journey with you as well. So like I said before, I know my husband's big driver is time. So if I can find a solution that's going to save time, then he's going to be on board without question. It might be also that, how do you, what I was saying before, how do you design change so that it's easy? So if you make the good behavior the easy behavior to do, then again, people are going to default that because it's human nature, it's neuroscience, it's all those things for us to go, if there's a shortcut to take, I'll take it. Right, so how do you make it as easy as possible? So one example, and the day that I embraced that, I was kind of lazy, was a real breakthrough for me, right? Because now it's like, I know it's got to be the simplest thing, and I see it in my kids every day, right? They will do the simplest thing they possibly can. Like if their school bag needs to go back in the wardrobe, it will be dropped at the door in front of the wardrobe. How do you make the good behavior as easy as possible to do? So, and that can be as simple as, from a food waste point of view, I'm always like, put any food scraps, like any half-eaten pieces of fruit or vegetables or anything, we use those in smoothies, we use those in soups, etc. They need to go in the freezer. And one of the simplest changes I made was just to I've got 2 containers in the freezer, one for fruit, one for vegetables. And one of the simplest things I did was to take the lids off those, so then it's like everybody can just open the drawer, throw it in without even having to take a lid off. And that seems ridiculous, right? Like taking a lid off is not a whole lot of work, but just that one small change, and the kids now love throwing stuff in there, so it's kind of made it a little bit fun as well. So I think you've really got to go, okay, how do I make the good behavior the easy behavior to do? How do I make sure the behavior is tapping into the why of the other people that I'm going to try and get to change? And then also what can really work as well is kind of just getting people conscious about why we need to be changing. And honestly, the simplest thing I find is to watch a movie, watch the David Attenborough movie with your kids, or watch the minimalism documentary with your partner, or because sometimes it's just way more effective if it's not coming from you, if it's coming from somewhere else. And in that, I also find if it's telling stories of other people and the changes they've made and the impact that's had, that can be really powerful as well, because it kind of creates a level of relatability. And there's a story that I tell, which I love, which is a colleague from work, and she was kind of on that whole, I really want to not become a minimalist, but I really want to, kind of simplify the amount of stuff we have. But my husband's just the other extreme, and he's just totally not on board. So I suggested the movie thing, and she's like, I went home and talked about the movie, and he's like, nah, I don't want to watch it. It was the minimalism documentary, and he's like, nah, I don't want to watch it. And she's like, well, I'm going to watch it. So she sat on the couch, watched it, and he was kind of just walking in and out, doing his thing, kind of coming past. And then she said it was about a week later, and he was like, so I've been thinking about that documentary. And, and obviously it kind of picked up on things, but in his own way. Like, he didn't want to feel pressured to have to sit down and watch it, but just because those messages were kind of there in the background, he was kind of taking them in his own time, and it helped kind of change his thinking. So yeah, and all of that, I've obviously just spoken for about 5 minutes. It sounds really complex, but it's just a slight change in thinking. Like, it might be, okay, we're going to sit down and watch a movie together, and okay, I've got a change I want to make. How do I do it in a way that's easy and taps into the why of whoever I'm trying to influence?
Yes, definitely. And I think that it's so important to be able to do that, like going back to that's always such an important place to start with. And I'm really curious about, you just mentioned your kids. I'm really curious about how, for parents, because I also, like having kids, it's a big thing, and they perhaps are not in the same place as us to be able to think of of the consequences, and of course, like I know from when I was a kid, like I saw the kids like that had something, I'm like, oh my god, I want that, it's like, and how do you deal with that, and how do you share that with other parents?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the biggest thing that I have done is to have conversations with my kids, because when they were really young, you could kind of control things. You could just avoid situations, or they weren't at school and there wasn't a whole lot of comparison, or birthday parties were a lot smaller scale and things like that. So when they were younger, I actually found it easier, right? Because you could kind of control where they were, what they saw. But now they're both at school now, and they're being exposed to a lot more stuff. And I have found, and I did start this from a young age as well, is just the power of having conversations with your children, because I can't control every moment of their life. My job as a parent is actually to empower them with the knowledge and information to help them make their own decisions, right? So a big thing for me has been just explaining the why and explaining the impact. And I don't want my kids to be the weird kid at the party that's telling everybody not to, I don't know, not to give out goodie bags or not to give presents, or so it's a really fine balance. So for me, it's all about just having conversations and explaining things and talking about their choices, and not berating them for making bad choices, but just giving them the knowledge and information that they need. So, goodie bags is a nice example, right? So if, my daughter went to a party, she came home with a goodie bag, 90% of the stuff in that bag was in the rubbish within 3 days, right? So then it was a conversation around, oh, mum, this is broken. So then it's a conversation around, that's not awesome. Is that something you got in the goodie bag? Yeah, it is. And she said, it's just not made to last, is it? And it's just plastic that's going to end up in the rubbish bin. And I said, yeah. And she said, next time I go to a party, I don't think I'll get a goodie bag. I'm like, that's cool. It's totally up to you. But if you feel like that's the right choice, then that's up to you. And I reckon probably half the time she'd take one and half the time she wouldn't. But we also talk about, you don't want to, you need to be kind to people and not upset people. And, so it's actually a brilliant parenting moment to be able to have those conversations. One, because it helps your children navigate it, but two, it helps you navigate it as well, because when you're having to kind of explain things, then it kind of helps get things clearer in your head as well. So look, it's not a black and white situation, because nothing in life is, but it is having conversations is a really, really big part of that.
And I think that as well, you just mentioned the word kind. Like, for me, that is such a big thing for anyone, I mean, in general, but anyone that is in this journey, especially for parents, being kind with yourself, being kind with others, because there's going to be a lot of things within this space that, as we are learning how things are different and how I can do this, how I can do that, I might not do the right thing out of my own values, out of my why. And being able to be kind with that, it's, I decided that, because my family doesn't live here in New Zealand, like, I decided that even though I know the footprint of traveling, every 2 years or so, I am going to go and visit them. And I know that it's a conscious choice that I have. And if I, there's things in the airplane that I'm like, sometimes I'm like, even if I don't want it, they just give you stuff. And I can say no, thank you, no, thank you. And whatever I don't use, sometimes they're just going to chuck it into the bin.
Yeah.
And it's being kind and compassionate with all of that, because there's, I do a lot of, every time that I walk as well, like I walk even from home to here to the office, and it's just 8 blocks. And every single day I pick up rubbish from the street, and it's being kind with the people that perhaps they don't know enough to not realize that actually is not a good thing. And it's all of the time reminding myself and reminding the people that I work with is be kind, and be kind with others, because we don't know. Like, I didn't know before I started doing all of the things. I didn't know the stuff that I do now. So I need to use that kindness.
And to be kind to yourself too, right? That you can't, like you said, you've made a conscious choice to travel back to see your family, and that's, be kind to yourself in terms of that's the choice you've made, and you can't be perfect, either. So I think it's really easy. And I found myself, when you were asking what the challenges were, I found that a challenge for myself as well, in terms of when things are happening either out of your control, or you've made a decision that, it's really easy to feel guilty about that. So I think just absolutely be kind to other people, because everybody's at a different place on their journey, but also be kind to yourself and just let stuff go, because you can't, if you start holding on to everything and feeling guilty, if you, like sometimes I'll go to a meeting and someone's ordered me a coffee in a disposable coffee cup, you can't, you just got to let it go, because things happen. And I think that helps make it more relatable. Like, I will completely take the absolute mick out of that situation. If someone buys me a coffee in a disposable cup, you have to, having a sense of humor and being kind and, and making it relatable and not alienating is a really, really important part, because as soon as people feel alienated or that what they're doing is not good enough, then that just backs them into a corner and leads to inaction. So be kind to other people, be kind to yourself, absolutely.
Yeah, and in those situations that you just mentioned, like having that conversation, like, and for me it's the same. Like, there's things that I know that are out of my control, and with a lot of things, whenever there's an opportunity, I actually mention, and just having the conversation of getting people to understand. And as well, like I know the impact of a lot of things, and I'm still partaking. Just like I mentioned, like going on an airplane once every 2 years or whatever. Like, I am now talking to you on my computer, which I know that it's not made to last forever. That how, like, all of the components, I know where they come from. I still have a phone. I'm still using internet. I'm still using social media, and I know, like, and of course, this, like, perhaps it's not the easier things, because it's out of my control, and unless I decide to go completely off grid, I'm still going to have a footprint. Even if I go completely off grid, I'm still going to have a footprint. So it's that being kind.
Yeah, and also, like, for me, and this has become my ideology, I guess, in terms of what I do, is it's that concept of better. If everybody focused on just doing a little bit better, no matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, then that, how awesome is that, right? I often have conversations about things like meat and air travel and all of those things. And to me, it's, if everybody has the mindset of, okay, I'm an airline or I'm a butcher or whatever that is, if everybody has a mindset of, well, how do I do that better? It's not about black and white saying you shouldn't be doing that or you shouldn't be doing that. It's like, okay, well, how does everybody just focus on doing a little bit better, and then that journey of evolution and change is heading in the direction that we need it to be, right? So it's that whole, progress over perfection aspect, right?
Yes, definitely. And I do think as well, like, especially, I mean, given the name of your business, Mainstream Green, like being able to bring these things into mainstream, it's not going to be from one day to the next, everything is perfect. It's like, it's taking those steps to make it easier and better and more convenient as well, the things that are actually good for the planet and for ourselves.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you use the word convenient, because I think that's a really big myth that I spend a lot of time busting as well, is that's the biggest barrier people come up with, is I just don't have the time to do this. And I get it, I totally get that. Time is a very valuable commodity, but I think there's also been a lot of, we've been marketed to in terms of convenience, and I use a really simple example of supermarkets. So when I was growing up, supermarkets were open business hours, Monday to Friday and Saturday mornings, and that was it. Now they're open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, some of them, right? And these sorts of things are kind of, we believe that they're done to be more convenient. Well, the reality is we're just spending more of our time. We're going to the supermarket more than we ever have before, multiple times per week, because it feels like it's more convenient to just shoot to the shop and buy a prepackaged whatever. The reality is we're just spending more of our lives shopping to buy things. So, and we sort of, touched on that before as well, but I think it's convenience and what that means in our modern day lives is I now know that the most convenient thing for me is not to leave my house. If I run out of eggs, it's not convenient for me to hop on my car and drive to the supermarket and buy eggs. Actually, it's convenient for me to stay at home and go, actually, I wonder if I can borrow some off my neighbour, or I wonder if I can substitute, something else for eggs in that recipe. So I think there's this real kind of modern day myth, I guess, a bit around convenience as well.
Yeah, and I do think, I'm starting to see a little bit of a change in terms as well on the sharing economy. You just mentioned, going to your neighbor. There has been this disconnect and this individualization and isolation from everything. Not only isolation in terms of COVID, like isolation in terms of like we are all our own island and our own core family, like, and not our neighbors. I'm seeing, like with Airbnb and Uber and all of this, but now that there starts to be more tool libraries or like all of these apps that you can share with people in your neighborhood as well, or even rent something, this is going to also make things much easier in a sense and more convenient, but also doing things better.
Yeah, sharing economy is awesome. And the likes of Mutu, that sharing app and things that have popped up, technology is enabling it to happen a lot more. I mean, I would love to. I have this crazy vision in my head that, if you went into like any suburb in any developed country in the world, but we'll take New Zealand as an example, and kind of lifted the roof off all of the houses, there'd be all of these things that are just, everybody's got one and they hardly use it, right? Like a power drill, is a good example. There's been a really cool TED talk on power drills. The fact that on average a power drill is used for something like 15 minutes of its life, right? Because we all feel like we need a power drill. We don't need the drill, we need the hole in the wall, is what, I can't remember the lady's name, but it was a brilliant TED talk.
Yes.
And it's the same, it's a lawnmower, like your lawnmower is probably latent for 99% of its time, right? And because things are quite a lot cheaper than they used to be, etc. It's so easy to have them and to buy them. But I love the fact that technology is enabling the sharing economy to help kind of change that paradigm. I think we've still got a long way to go, but I think it's doing some really cool things. And interestingly enough, I've done social media posts. Whenever I go to a special occasion, I will rent something to wear. So I don't own, I don't really own anything that is sort of, any flash gears for a special occasion. So I will rent them. So I've been to a couple of weddings this season and rented something. And every time I do a post about that, the engagement's been through the roof, because I think people also go, oh, you're not telling me I have to go without things. You're actually telling me there's a way that I can still, look good, or still have variety and still have access to things, but that is actually, still a better choice. So I think it's when people really kind of get into that thinking as well, it can be really feel really good, because people are like, okay, cool, you're not, because again, there's this perception that sometimes doing things more sustainably is all about going without or deprivation, actually, whereas if we just change our thinking and come up with different ways of doing things, it can actually open up, so many possibilities and so much variety and so much access if we just think about it in a different way.
Yes, definitely. And I do know, as you mentioned, like with technology, and I know that technology is not going to solve everything, but technology is enabling us to actually do a lot of amazing things, as being connected like this and being able to share things and to be able to have access to things a little bit easier. So there's, I have this relationship with technology that is like, it's how we use it. It's not just about, it's not about
the silver bullet, but it's an enabler. Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah.
Definitely. And I'm curious, Nick, if you would be able to share a little bit your experience, and this is a little bit different from the topics that we've been talking about, but with writing your book, like you just had a book coming out, and I'm curious, so that also people understand, like what's a little bit of the process for anyone that is thinking of writing a book.
Yeah. What's the process of writing a book? So how my book came about. I'm not a natural writer. My natural state is talking. That's kind of what I love doing, and what comes more naturally to me than writing. So but kind of felt like, because a lot of my time is spent engaging human to human and talking, that's limited. And so I had a lot of requests in terms of, could I write a book, because it just allows to the message to get out more broadly and more people to interact with it. So I was kind of banging around in the back of my head, and then I did a speaking event up in Auckland, and I was the planets aligned, and somebody from HarperCollins was there, so he kind of heard me speak, and it really resonated with him personally, and our conversation kind of led on from there in terms of how could we turn that into a book. So I was very lucky in terms of it kind of fell into my lap. But I guess if you kind of unpick that, it fell into my lap because I had something to talk about, I guess, that then became something to write about. So, and that didn't come, that wasn't, again, a lightning bolt where I could stand up and talk. It was probably a 5 or 6 year journey of really refining my message and understanding what resonated with people, and understanding what people could relate to and what people would be interested in. And then for me, it was that process of turning it into a written form. So I think, I guess if it's a case of asking me for advice, it's like, have something to say and figure out what that something to say is, and socialize it with people and understand what they want to hear, be that, hearing or reading, whatever that might be. And then in terms of turning it into a book, it was like, it wasn't some romantic process of going to a cabin in the woods and, channeling my inner voice. It was a lot of hard graft. It was, when I first started, it was getting up at 5:30 in the morning and spending 45 minutes before everybody else in the house woke up writing. And the first stuff I wrote was awful, but it was just that process of just the discipline of it. And the more I wrote, the more I kind of refined and found my style that I felt comfortable with. And the book is, a lot of people who know me, who read the book, are like, oh, I can just imagine you saying this, because it's the way that I speak, which is what I felt comfortable with. And it's lots of visuals and lots of kind of annotated comments, because that's how I talk. I'll kind of, say something, then I'm like, don't forget about this, and don't forget about this. And, so I tried to bring that to life in the book as well. So look, a long process and an intense process, but a really rewarding process as well.
Beautiful. I'm looking forward to be able to actually get my hand on one of them. And now that we're talking about books, what's Nick resource that, besides your book, that you would that you would share with people, or like, it can be a book or it can be any resource, website, documentary, where
And
did
by
it?
the way, I just caveat that with I highly encourage people, if you do want to read my book, to borrow it from the library, talking about the sharing economy. But yeah, all the library should have it, so go and borrow it there to begin with. So I think films make things, like I said before, really accessible. And Happen Films, which is a New Zealand-based film company, is what I love about them is they are telling stories of people that are doing positive things. And I think that's really nice, because I think, one, as humans, we're drawn to the positive. We can relate to that. We can see ourselves in it. And we can see a solution, because I think we're beyond focusing on the problem now. I think we all know it's a problem and we don't need to know more of it being a problem. I think we need to focus on what we can do. And so Happen Films have done an awesome cross-section of films. You're nodding, so you obviously know who they are. And and a lot of it's online that you can watch. So I think they're brilliant and a really nice, positive, relatable forum for people to get into. I also think if podcasts are more your thing, obviously this podcast, I love listening to podcasts. I can just, put it on when I'm cooking dinner, so I find that really accessible as well. And the guys that are doing the How to Save the World podcast as well, like that's really, but like you, it's lots of different kind of topics, which is another podcast.
Yeah.
In that.
Yeah, I love actually I like both of the resources that you share. Like I watch and I know the guys from Happen Films and I watched, I think, at almost all of their films, and to be able to hear as well like the How to Save the World podcast is so good. Like I mean, I love being able to also like not having to listen to my voice, so it's good to have another podcast to listen to. So that's a great one. And if someone is asking for one tip, what is the first thing that you would say?
I say to take a pause. So for me, before I go to buy or consume something, I now just take it's just a micro pause. It's just a tiny moment where I go, do I really need this? Do I really want this? And if I do, that's totally fine. It's not about going without, but then going, can I do it in a better way? Right? So I don't know, you might be in the clothing store and you found something and it's just that pause to go, actually, instead of getting caught up with that in that moment of instant gratification, actually, do I really need it? Do I really want it? Can I make a better choice? It's just that flicking a switch into that consciousness, right? Because so much of our consumption is on autopilot. So how do we just jump up into that conscious part of our brain for a moment and just ask ourselves the question?
Yes, definitely. And the last question is, what is the one thing that you wish everyone in the world knew?
How good it feels to take an action, no matter how small it is. Because I think it's really easy for people to sit around thinking about it. And that's where that whole one small change comes. An action, no matter how small it is, it just feels really good. So, and it gets quite addictive. And it's quite empowering. So yeah, again, next time you just take a moment wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and go, can I just make one small change? It's going to be a better choice, not a perfect choice, but a better choice. And just revel in how it feels when you do it. Because I think if we embrace that, then it just leads on to so much more of a journey of change.
Beautiful. And how can people find you online?
Mainstream Green. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn under Nicola Turner, and Mainstream Green is on there as well. But yeah, I'm just on all the social channels. I am Mainstream Green. Sometimes I get emails to the HR department and the IT department, the finance department. It's all me. So if you ever want to reach out, you will get me. And yeah, pretty easy to find under Mainstream Green on all the normal channels.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nick, for taking the time to be here with us and for sharing a little bit of your story and your tips. And for everything that you're doing. Like, it's awesome. Like I follow what you do. Like, I've had you at one of the conscious action events, and I love that you're able to be here. And for everyone that has been listening to this episode, I would love to know what resonated with you. What did you learn? Are you already doing some of these things? So until the next episode, thank you so much, everyone. See you then. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.